What unfolds when one of the film industry's most admired performers steps into what is supposed to be an ordinary morning television appearance, only to realize the conversation is steering toward controversy rather than cinema? The atmosphere inside the Good Morning America studio felt unusually heavy, as if every person present sensed that something uncomfortable was about to happen. Viewers at home would soon find themselves glued to their screens, surprised by how quickly a routine promotional segment transformed into a tense exchange no one had predicted. Tom Hardy had entered the studio earlier that day, expecting the familiar rhythm of publicity duties. His newest movie was already attracting award speculation, and his team had reassured him that the discussion would center on the film's message, his preparation, and the creative journey behind the role. Instead, the environment he stepped into felt less like a friendly interview and more like a spotlight designed to provoke. Across from him sat Michael Strahan, wearing the confident smile audiences recognized from years of television. Yet there was a subtle sharpness in his expression, a hint that the dialogue ahead might not be as comfortable as Hardy anticipated. The introduction began smoothly enough, with Strahan greeting the audience in his polished, upbeat style and welcoming Hardy to the program. Hardy responded courteously, easing into his seat with a composed presence that blended calmness with alert focus. He wore understated clothing, a dark blazer layered over a simple shirt, projecting an image of quiet professionalism. His posture suggested readiness, but also a guarded awareness, as if he was already evaluating the direction the conversation might take. Strahan quickly moved beyond pleasantries and shifted into deeper territory. He mentioned the film's challenging subject matter, themes of addiction and family pain, and then steered the question toward Hardy's personal life. The inquiry, while not entirely unusual for actors, carried a tone that felt more probing than reflective. Hardy's expression changed slightly, his eyebrows lifting just enough to reveal surprise. He answered carefully, explaining that performers often draw from observation, research, and fragments of life experience to build authenticity. His words were measured, clearly intended to keep the discussion grounded in the craft rather than personal history. The host, however, pressed further, referencing past struggles that Hardy had spoken about publicly years before. The shift in energy was immediate. Hardy's jaw tightened subtly, and the relaxed rhythm of the exchange disappeared. He replied with controlled firmness, emphasizing that personal growth should not be turned into spectacle. He made it clear that while he had been open about parts of his past when it served a meaningful purpose, he was not interested in revisiting those chapters merely to boost viewership. Strahan attempted to soften the moment with a light chuckle, suggesting that public curiosity came with fame. Hardy's response remained steady, but carried unmistakable resolve. He questioned whether the curiosity truly belonged to viewers or if it was being shaped for dramatic effect. The tension became visible in Hardy's body language. His hands, once loosely resting on the chair, grew still and deliberate, and what had begun as a promotional appearance was now drifting into confrontation. The host continued, pointing out Hardy's reputation for portraying intense, morally complex characters and wondering aloud how much of those roles reflected the man himself. Hardy paused, and the silence filled the studio with a palpable unease. When he spoke again, his voice was calm yet edged with steel. He described the real version of himself as someone deeply committed to preparation, discipline, and respect for the work. He added that he expected the same professionalism from those he collaborated with, including interviewers. For a brief moment, Strahan's confident smile faltered. He defended the approach by framing the exchange as genuine television, an honest dialogue between two people. Hardy repeated the phrase slowly, almost analytically, then countered that from his perspective, it felt less like authenticity and more like an attempt to manufacture a viral moment. Cameras continued capturing every glance and subtle movement, while producers likely recognized the brewing drama as compelling television. Hardy, however, showed no interest in feeding the spectacle. Strahan argued that audiences wanted to see the individual behind the performances. Hardy replied that if honesty was the goal, then the questions should focus on the art itself, the months of training, the collaboration with directors, the creative risks, rather than personal issues unrelated to the project. His tone remained controlled, but impatience was beginning to surface beneath the surface composure. Instead of easing off, the host suggested that when actors take on emotionally charged roles, it is natural for people to search for personal parallels. Hardy responded swiftly, stating that what truly mattered was thoughtful journalism that informed viewers about the craft rather than satisfying a hunger for gossip. He expressed the belief that morning television had the opportunity to elevate discussions instead of reducing them to sensational sound bites. The words lingered in the studio air, creating a noticeable shift. Strahan's polished television persona seemed to crack slightly, revealing a more defensive edge. His voice lost some of its rehearsed warmth as he reminded Hardy of his experience and implied that discomfort with scrutiny might be the real issue. Hardy did not raise his voice or change his facial expression, but his posture adjusted. He leaned back a fraction, folding his hands together with intentional calm, signaling that he remained in control, even as the exchange grew sharper. With scrutiny, he echoed, letting the word hang in the air with a quiet trace of contempt. Is that what you're calling this little hunt? Strahan shot back immediately, his voice lifting just enough to betray a crack in his composure. He insisted it was journalism. Real inquiries for real individuals, not polished publicity chatter where famous people are treated as if they exist beyond ordinary curiosity. Ordinary curiosity, Hardy repeated slowly, nodding as though weighing the phrase. Then he turned the idea around with deliberate calm. He asked Strahan whether, during his football career, interviewers had spent their time digging into his private struggles, or whether they had focused on his performance, his training, and his role within the team. The comparison landed with visible force. Strahan's expression hardened, and the relaxed posture he had carefully maintained stiffened into something defensive. He dismissed the analogy, arguing that sports revolved around numbers and measurable results, while acting did not fit into such clear metrics. Hardy's tone remained level, almost maddeningly composed, which only seemed to intensify Strahan's irritation. He countered that every creative decision an actor makes can be evaluated. Every gesture, every line delivery, every moment on screen stems from preparation and technique. Yet, he observed, none of that appeared to be of interest. Strahan leaned forward, the familiar broadcast grin gone entirely. He declared that his aim was to provide the audience with something genuine and unscripted rather than allowing an actor to hide behind polished language and intellectual airs. Intellectual airs, Hardy repeated. And for the first time a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, though it carried no warmth. He described that label as an unusual way to define basic professionalism and respect for one's work. He declared that he was tired of actors behaving as if they were superior to everyone else, tired of them presenting themselves as profound artists when, in his view, they were merely pretending for a living. He insisted that at least his own achievements were tangible and had a direct impact on people's everyday lives. The eruption was so sudden and so unfiltered that the entire studio seemed to freeze. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Camera operators glanced at one another in disbelief, producers murmured urgently into their headsets, and the small group of audience members sat motionless, unsure how to react. The atmosphere no longer resembled a cheerful morning broadcast. It felt more like a very public unraveling, unfolding in real time before millions of viewers. Hardy, in sharp contrast, barely moved. If anything, the host's emotional flare-up appeared to steady him even further, as though the chaos across the desk had the opposite effect on his own composure. When he finally answered, the calmness in his delivery made the words land with even greater force. He repeated the phrase, applying dress up in a quiet tone that carried effortlessly through the hushed studio, then remarked that it was an intriguing viewpoint coming from someone whose role largely involved reading scripted lines and posing questions prepared by others. So, Strahan's eyes widened, the realization dawning that his heated reaction had handed Hardy the upper hand. He quickly tried to defend himself, insisting that he did far more than read from a screen, that he conducted meaningful interviews with genuine impact. Hardy nodded thoughtfully, as though considering the claim with sincere interest. He referenced the present moment, asking whether this very exchange was the sort of impact being described. If so, he suggested, perhaps the definitions of both Ariel and impacted deserved reconsideration. The words were delivered so evenly that they felt less like insults and more like carefully placed weights. Impossible to ignore. Sweat began to show along Strahan's hairline, the strain of the situation creeping into his otherwise polished appearance. His voice trembled slightly as he accused Hardy of acting superior, of sitting there with controlled responses, as if he were above the entire spectacle. He insisted the actor was no different from anyone else who believed the world owed him recognition or privilege. Hardy's face remained unchanged, yet when he replied there was a faint note of genuine curiosity in his voice. He questioned what exactly he had demanded from the world, pointing out that he had simply arrived to speak about a film and the collaborative effort behind it. The months of dedication from writers, crew members, and fellow performers who had poured their energy into creating something meaningful for audiences. Strahan opened his mouth as if to counter, then hesitated, the realization settling in that his argument lacked footing. Embarrassment and frustration colored his expression. Hardy continued in the same steady cadence, suggesting that perhaps the host was projecting his own expectations onto someone else. From where he sat, it appeared that Strahan was the one expecting the world to deliver drama, controversy, and attention, grabbing moments, and content that would fuel headlines and social media chatter regardless of its actual substance. The host protested weakly, claiming he provided a valuable service by informing and entertaining viewers. Hardy tilted his head slightly, questioning what service had truly been offered that morning. He asked what information had been shared, what genuine news had been delivered, and what entertainment had been presented beyond the spectacle of watching a presenter struggle to maintain control of his own program. Each question lingered in the air, heavy with implication, and Strahan seemed to shrink under their cumulative weight. He glanced around the studio as though searching for support, but the crew avoided his gaze, focusing intently on their equipment. Grasping for authority, Strahan reminded Hardy that he had willingly agreed to appear on the show. Hardy acknowledged this without hesitation. He explained that he had arrived in good faith, expecting a professional discussion centered on work he was proud of, work that represented the efforts of countless talented individuals. Instead, he found himself caught in what felt less like an interview and more like an attempt to dismantle his character for the sake of spectacle. He observed that the line between journalism and sensationalism had clearly blurred, and not in a way that served the audience. Strahan's lips parted again, but no immediate response came. The balance of power had shifted completely, and the reversal was impossible to miss. What had started as a standard promotional segment had transformed into an uncomfortable display of tension broadcast live to an enormous audience. The studio lights still shone brightly. The cameras still rolled, yet the energy in the room had changed entirely. The host who had once steered the conversation now seemed adrift, while the guest he had tried to unsettle remained composed, his measured words echoing through the silence that followed. "But this is the part that's truly revealing, Michael," Hardy continued, his tone almost relaxed, which somehow made the sharpness of his words even more striking. In trying so hard to force a headline, to manufacture tension where none existed, he explained, the host had unintentionally exposed something far more telling than any detail he had hoped to pull from Hardy's private history. Strahan blinked, clearly uneasy. He asked what that was supposed to mean, though his expression suggested he already feared the answer. Hardy replied simply that Strahan had revealed himself. He said the audience had just been shown exactly what kind of journalist he chose to be, what mattered most to him, and how much regard he truly held for both his guests and the viewers watching at home. In Hardy's view, that unintentional self-portrait was far more compelling than any personal anecdote that could have been dragged into the spotlight. The studio had grown so quiet that the soft whir of the cameras became the only consistent sound. Every lens remained trained on Strahan, capturing each subtle shift in his posture and expression. Hardy continued, his voice steady but gaining quiet momentum. He pointed out that the host had demonstrated a willingness to corner a guest who had arrived with honest intentions, that he seemed more focused on provoking emotion than delivering meaningful conversation. He added that when questioned about his approach, Strahan had responded not with facts or professionalism, but with personal jabs and visible frustration. Strahan looked as if he wished the chair beneath him could simply swallow him whole. The earlier confidence that had colored his demeanor was gone, replaced by the uneasy awareness of someone who understood he had miscalculated on a very public stage. Hardy leaned forward slightly, not in aggression, but with deliberate emphasis, and said that the most important thing revealed was the absence of a backup plan. When a guest refused to play along with manufactured conflict, there was no alternative path, no prepared route toward a thoughtful discussion. According to Hardy, that absence spoke volumes about the difference between seeking drama and conducting a genuine interview. The delivery was so precise and controlled that the impact felt almost tangible. Strahan's entire on-screen persona seemed to deflate, the practiced polish dissolving into a subdued silence. Hardy then leaned back again, glancing at his watch with an almost casual air that contrasted sharply with the intensity of the moment. He remarked that perhaps their time would be better spent concluding the segment unless the host wished to return to the subject he had originally come to discuss, the film and the collaborative effort behind it, though he suspected that opportunity had already slipped away. He rose from his seat slowly, each movement measured, and began unclipping the small microphone attached to his jacket. The simple gesture carried a sense of finality that rippled through the studio, breaking the strange stillness that had settled over the room. Han's voice called out, tinged with urgency, asking him to wait and suggesting they could begin again, that they could redirect the conversation toward the movie after all. Hardy paused mid-motion and looked directly at him for several long seconds. Science, When he spoke, his voice was quiet yet carried clearly across the set. He said that, in his opinion, the audience had already learned everything they needed to know about both of them from what had just unfolded, and there was little left that words could add. With that, he finished removing the microphone, placed it neatly on the chair, and turned away from the desk. He walked off the set with the same composed dignity he had maintained throughout the exchange, neither hurried nor theatrical, simply decisive. Behind him, Strahan remained seated, stunned into silence while the cameras continued to roll, documenting every second of the aftermath. What had been scheduled as a straightforward promotional stop had transformed into something entirely different, a vivid illustration of how calm restraint can counter forced spectacle and how professionalism can hold its ground even when confronted with deliberate provocation. The bright studio lights still shone. The broadcast continued. Yet the energy in the room had shifted completely, leaving an unmistakable impression that the moment would be remembered long after the segment ended.